Kwong, I was thinking about some things earlier that Kwong brought back up in my mind, and just as well as final perspectives. I think that the overarching theme of this conference today kind of reinstilled in me a theme that I have felt in the different relationships that I've had with the business sector and the for-profit sector in the past. And I shared this with Babur in the middle of the speech, and that is that the business world it kind of invokes two emotions in me at once. It invokes sheer and utter disgust at some of the aspects and practices of the business world, but at the same time, just absolute awe at the success that some of these companies have, the distribution networks that they're able to use, the way that they're able to turn what could be practices described as being disgusting and really spin them. I mean, for example, the gentleman from Procter & Gamble completely swiped away any discussion of their socially conscious business practices and covered it basically at the end of his little intro talk with I'm not saying that social responsibility isn't important, but it doesn't really matter in the for-profit sector. And I think that that's the prevailing theme of the business world, that you can't link social responsibility with something that is for-profit. And I actually, from a personal level, disagree with that theme, and I think that that's something that we can really harness in our world of kind of bridging the gap between social responsibility and the private sector. And I think the other thing that really resonated with me was the use of terms. Kind of the fact that it is a culture unto itself, and it brought back different conversations that we've had in our groups, and thinking of Sahil's suggestion of the word of the day. I mean, the words as you went from lecture to lecture and panel to panel were all the same in terms of just the use of catchphrases that seemed to have 5 or 6 different meanings depending on context. But the catchphrase was recognizable, and therefore it got your foot in the door. Use of phrases like the triple bottom line, which we talked about in our group. Use of phrases, words like innovation and social responsibility, and even the loose definitions of what the for-profit sector means. And I think the other prevailing theme, coming back to this, the gentleman Colin Brady from Product Red, is the role that the public has to play in all of it. A question was raised, which I thought was an excellent question, as to why Product Red puts their profits into antiretroviral therapy and not prevention, when prevention is, quote-unquote, the long-term answer to the HIV pandemic. And I was struck by 2 things, both the lack of functional use of words that are commonly used in the HIV world, having been in that world for a while, that is completely lacking from the business world, and hoping that we as a group don't suffer the same folly with respect to the business world, that we can really reach out into the business world and try and understand it a little bit more, because I felt like the references to the health world and to the world of medicine were really lacking in many cases. But also that, but to his response to that question, he said that that Project Red directed their money to treatment and not to prevention, basically because it made the public feel better. That it was much easier to say to an individual, here is your $25 that are going into 50 antiretroviral pills to go to Swaziland to treat this woman who we can show to you. And in that is the implication, I think, although he didn't say it specifically, that the same doesn't hold true for prevention. And it almost assumes a sense of public lack of interest, lack of awareness, lack of knowledge. Whereas I think that if you could harness education about prevention in the United States to those campaigns, that you could do the same thing and you could have a much more well-rounded application of those funds. So I think that just my general theme of the day is really making sure that we as a group, whether we adopt practices from the business world, really try and understand the philosophies of the business world and help them shape us both in a positive way and in things to avoid.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on one of the first things you said. You talked about your disgust with certain aspects of the business world. And the gentleman from Procter & Gamble, I don't recall his name.
Clifford something or other.
Yeah, I think it was something Clifford, actually. I believe Clifford was the last name.
Was it?
Anyway, the gentleman from Procter & Gamble, who was kind of very, very open about this. I actually really liked what he said, because I'm an engineer. I'm very, very practical, And sometimes I'm also kind of a Marxist, despite some of the criticisms of Marxism that came up today.
Only for one person.
And I think we live in kind of a world of historical contingency, and we should do whatever we can do because the world isn't perfect, is really what that comes down to. And I don't think what he was getting at wasn't that corporate responsibility kind of no one cared about it or that it wasn't important. I think rather it was that if you really want to look at the corporate world, and especially these big mega corporations like Procter and Gamble, which is a huge company,
Indeed.
$500 billion company. If you really, I mean, they are kind of the engine of global capitalism. I mean, they are it. It kind of reminds me of Ayn Rand, whom I hate, but who said one great thing. And when John Galt destroyed society, he said, "I'm gonna halt the engine of the world," which was talent. I mean, it was intellectual talent. It was people who could do things, who could get things done. Corporate talent, and that's really what these companies are. They're the engine of the world. They make things go. And if you really want to harness that for social purposes, you can't just say, "Oh, corporate responsibility," which is a kind of guilt complex. It's a kind of, hey, you're making lots of money, and you should feel bad for it, and you should give some of it, to foundations and these things. Mm-hmm. If you really want to harness that power truly, what you have to do is put it in their terminology, in their playing field, and say, hey, you can make money off of this. This can be a corporate model for you. This isn't just like something that we're going to guilt you into because we have a whole complex about being too rich. We don't like to be rich in America. This is really, hey, you can make a lot of money off of this, and you can do good things, mm-hmm. and you can really harness that, several $1 trillion American, corporate system to do a lot of good things in that way. And I really liked what the gentleman from Procter & Gamble said about that, because I think he was very open in saying, hey, this is the way to do things. This is really the way to get things done. If you can harness my $200 billion company, to solve the AIDS problem in Africa, it's the company that can do it. Right. No one else can do it, because a $500 million foundation can't do it. But, Procter & Gamble can't, because they have the resources.